Hello and welcome. Tonight, we're going to begin a long and soothing journey through the entire story of Greek mythology. We're traveling far, far back, not to a time of stone palaces or marble temples, but to an age of gods and monsters, and the mortals who walked through a world shaped by fire and by fate. So find a comfortable position, dim the lights, and let your body begin to relax. Perhaps you have a fan on, providing that soft, steady hum that creates a space for quiet and for rest. Just let the gentle rhythm of this ancient story quiet your own thoughts and guide you toward a deep and restful sleep. If you find that these sleep stories help you find your rest, please feel free to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future journeys. But for now, there is nothing else to do. Just let your body grow heavy. Let your mind grow still, and let us begin. We begin before the beginning. Before gods and heroes, before mortals and monsters, there was chaos. This wasn't chaos as we think of it, not noise or confusion, but a vast, silent, and formless void. Imagine a quiet, endless chasm, the very absence of everything, a cosmic stillness, waiting. It was from this deep and profound nothingness that everything else would eventually emerge. From this swirling, indefinite void, the first great powers of the universe didn't just appear, they emerged as fundamental principles, the very building blocks of reality. First, there was Gaia, the broad-breasted earth. She was the solid foundation, the ground upon which all of life would one day stand. She simply rose from the void, a self-formed being, the first hint of stability in an age of formlessness. Then came Tartarus, a presence as deep and mysterious as Gaia was firm and present. Tartarus was both a place and a being, a gloomy subterranean abyss deep in the bowels of the earth, a vast chasm that would later become the ultimate prison for defeated gods and monsters. And then another power stirred into being, Eris. This wasn't the chubby, winged archer of later myths, but the primeval force of love and procreation itself. Eros was the cosmic engine, the raw impulse of desire that would drive creation forward. Without him, the universe would have remained a collection of lonely, sterile beings. His presence made union, and therefore all of creation, possible. From chaos itself, two more siblings were born. Erebus, the embodiment of sheer darkness, and his sister Nyx, the personification of the deep, silent night. They were the shadows that came before light, the unknowable gloom that filled the cosmos before the first stars were lit. In time, Erebus and Nyx would come together, giving birth to Ether, the pure, shining air of the heavens, and Hemera, the radiant light of day. But before that, Gaia, the great Mother Earth, lay vast and alone, a world without a sky, a body without a partner. Her deep longing for a companion, an equal to cover her on all sides, was a creative act in itself. From her own being, without a partner, she brought forth a son who would also become her consort. Alone, but filled with the boundless potential of a new world, Gaia created her equal. He was Uranus, the starry sky. He rose from her, a vast, star-spangled dome of magnificent blue, arching over her, covering her on every side. He was her perfect counterpart, the celestial embrace that completed her. The poet Hesiod describes him as equal to herself, a being of immense scale and power, born to be an ever-sure abiding place for the blessed gods. This wasn't just the birth of a god. It was the birth of the world's very structure. Earth and sky, the two great halves of the cosmos, were now in place. Their union was the first and most profound in all of creation. Uranus, the sky, descended to lay upon Gaia, the earth, and his fertile rains fell upon her, awakening the life sleeping within. From this cosmic consummation, the world began to take shape. Nourished by Uranus, Gaia gave birth to the physical world, the towering mountains, their peaks scraping the belly of her beloved sky, and Pontus, the deep and barren sea, filling the hollows of her form. Flowers, trees, and all life began to burst from her fertile skin. The love between Gaia and Uranus was unbelievably powerful and endlessly creative. Their union was constant, a perpetual act of generation that filled the new world with beings of immense power. They were the primal parents, the source of the first divine dynasty. But this perfect union, this joining of heaven and earth, held the seeds of a terrible conflict. Uranus, the sky, wasn't just a loving partner. He was an absolute ruler, and his love for power would curdle into a fear and hatred of his own children, a cruelty that would cause his devoted Gaia an agony she couldn't bear, and set the universe on a path toward rebellion and bloodshed. The perfect embrace of sky and earth was about to be broken. The union of Gaia and Uranus was staggeringly fertile, producing 3 distinct and awe-inspiring races. Their children weren't just gods. They were raw, elemental forces, personifications of nature's untamed power. First came the 12 Titans, 6 sons and 6 daughters who were gods in their own right, powerful and majestic. The sons were Oceanus, the great river encircling the world; Cus, the Titan of intellect; Crius, Hyperion, the Titan of heavenly light; Iapetus, who would father key figures like Prometheus; and the youngest, most ambitious of them all, Cronus. Their sisters were Thea, Phoebe, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, and Tethys. These 12 were magnificent, towering figures, the first true pantheon to walk the earth. But the creative force of Gaia and Uranus didn't stop there. Their next children were different, more monstrous. They gave birth to the 3 Cyclopes, Brontes, the Thunderer, Sterops, the Lightninger, and Arges, the Bright One. These weren't the brutish, man-eating shepherds of later stories, but master craftsmen, giants with a single blazing eye in their foreheads. Their power was immense. They were the living embodiment of the storm, capable of forging the very thunderbolts of heaven. Finally, Gaia gave birth to her most terrifying and powerful children yet, the Hecaton Shires, or the 100-handers. There were 3 of them, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. They were a chaotic maelstrom of raw strength. Each had 100 impossibly strong arms sprouting from their shoulders and 50 heads that writhed and roared with primal fury. They were beings of overwhelming force, the personification of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and nature's untamable violence. But Uranus, the Sky Father, looked upon these children not with love, but with terror and disgust. He may have admired the beautiful Titans, but he was horrified by the monstrous power of the Cyclopes and the Hecaton Shires. He saw them as a threat to his rule, a chaotic force that could one day usurp him. He feared their strength and hated their grotesque forms. Driven by this fear, Uranus did something unimaginably cruel. As soon as the Cyclopes and the Hecaton Shires were born, he seized them and thrust them back into the depths of the earth, imprisoning them deep within the womb of their mother, Gaia. He hid them away in the dark abyss of Tartarus, determined they would never see the light of day. This was a profound violation. Gaia, the Earth Mother, was forced to carry her monstrous children inside her, a constant, agonizing pain. The weight of her imprisoned sons was a physical and spiritual torment, a constant reminder of her husband's tyranny. A primal rage began to build within her, a mother's fury that would soon shake the cosmos and demand a terrible price. Gaia's anguish was unbearable. The constant pressure and pain from her imprisoned children, the Cyclopes and Hecaton Shires, grew worse each day. Her love for Uranus, the sky that once embraced her, had curdled into resentment and a burning need for justice. The very earth groaned under his tyranny. Fueled by her suffering, she hatched a plan for rebellion, a desperate act to free her children and punish her cruel husband. Deep within herself, Gaia created a new element, gray flint or adamant, a material of incredible hardness. From it, she fashioned a great and terrible weapon, a massive, jagged sickle. With this instrument of vengeance in hand, she gathered her other children, the 12 Titans, and laid out her plot. She spoke of their father's cruelty, her unending pain, and the injustice done to their siblings. She begged them to rise up and end his oppressive reign. But fear seized the Titans. The thought of confronting their father, the all-powerful ruler of the universe, was terrifying. One by one they shrank back, too afraid to act, all except one. Cronus, the youngest Titan, was also the most cunning and ambitious. He held a deep envy for his father's power, and felt no fear, only a cold resolve. He alone stepped forward and agreed to do the deed. Vastly pleased, Gaia gave the sickle to Cronus and explained the ambush. She hid him, and they waited. That night, just like every other night, Uranus descended, bringing the darkness with him. Filled with longing for Gaia, he spread himself over the earth, covering her completely, totally unaware of the treachery waiting for him. In that moment, 4 of Cronus's brothers, emboldened by his courage, took their positions at the 4 corners of the world to hold their father down. As Uranus lay with Gaia, Cronus sprang from his hiding place. With his left hand, he seized his father, and with his right, he swung the great adamantine sickle with all his might. In a single brutal act, he castrated his father, severing the bond between sky and earth forever. The act was cataclysmic. Uranus roared in agony and fury, pulling away from the earth, never to embrace her again. His blood rained down upon Gaia, and even from this violence, new life was born. From the drops that soaked the earth sprang the Erinyes, the dreaded Furies, terrifying goddesses of vengeance, who would forever hunt those who spill family blood. Also born were the Giants, a race of powerful, warlike beings, and the Malaya, the gentle nymphs of the ash trees. Cronus, in his grim triumph, flung the severed parts of his father far out into the sea. As they drifted on the waves, a white foam churned around the immortal flesh. And from that sea foam, a goddess of breathtaking beauty emerged, stepping ashore on the island of Cyprus. This was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and desire, born not from a womb, but from the cosmic violence that had just remade the universe. As he retreated to the heavens, a wounded and dethroned king, Uranus cursed his treacherous son. He prophesied that Cronus, too, would be overthrown by his own child, that his reign was destined to end in the same betrayal he had just committed. The fall of Uranus was complete. A new king now ruled the cosmos. With Uranus dethroned and the sky forever separate from the earth, Cronus seized the throne of the universe. He took his sister, the Titaness Rhea, as his queen, and together they presided over a new era. Under Cronus's rule, the world entered a time of such peace and prosperity that later poets would remember it as the Golden Age. During this time, humanity, if they yet existed, lived in a state of perfect harmony. The earth gave bountiful food on its own, with no need for labor. There was no sickness, no sorrow, no war. It was said that men and gods lived together peacefully. It was an age of innocence and abundance, an eternal spring where life was a blessing and death was like a peaceful sleep. Cronus, having ended his father's tyranny, seemed at first to be a just and benevolent ruler, presiding over a paradise. But the dark prophecy of Uranus echoed in his mind. Both his father and his mother, Gaia, had warned him, "You are fated to be overthrown by your own son." The very act that brought him to power was now the source of his greatest fear. He, who had betrayed his father, now lived in constant terror of being betrayed by his own children. This fear began to fester, twisting his reign from one of peace to one of paranoia. He had overthrown Uranus, but had learned nothing from his father's mistakes. In an act that mirrored Uranus's cruelty, Cronus refused to release his monstrous siblings, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, from Tartarus. Instead, he strengthened their bonds and set a fearsome dragon named Camp to guard them, ensuring their power could never be used against him. This revealed the true nature of his rule. It wasn't about justice, but about the ruthless preservation of his own power. The idyllic peace of the Golden Age was, for the gods, a fragile illusion, overshadowed by their king's growing dread. Cronus, the lord of a perfect world, was a prisoner of fate. He watched his wife Rhea. He watched the heavens, and he waited, consumed by the chilling certainty that his own children would one day rise up to destroy him. The Golden Age was built on a foundation of fear, and the king's paranoia would soon drive him to an act so horrific it would eclipse even the crimes of his father and set in motion the very downfall he so desperately wanted to avoid. A prophecy haunted Cronus day and night. His deposed father's words were a constant, tormenting reminder of his doom. He would be overthrown by his own son. As king of the gods, he was all-powerful, yet he was utterly powerless against fate. His paranoia grew into a monstrous obsession, and he came up with a chilling plan to defy destiny. He wouldn't just imprison his children. He would erase them. His wife, the Titaness Rhea, began to bear him children, a new generation of gods. First came Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. As soon as she was born, before Rhea could even hold her, Cronus seized the infant, opened his cavernous mouth, and swallowed her whole. Rhea was left in stunned horror, her joy turned to ash. This gruesome ritual was repeated with each new birth. Next came Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and she too was consumed by her father. Then came the glorious Hera, followed by two sons, Hades, the future lord of the underworld, and Poseidon, the earth-shaker who would command the seas. Each one, a beautiful and powerful new god, was devoured by Cronus the moment they left their mother's womb. He swallowed them down into the divine prison of his own belly, believing that if they never truly existed in the world, they could never rise to challenge him. Rhea was consumed by an unending grief. She had to watch as her husband, the king of the Golden Age, became a monstrous cannibal, his fear turning him into a tyrant far worse than Uranus ever was. She pleaded and wept, but Cronus was relentless, his terror hardening his heart. As she prepared to give birth to her sixth child, Rhea knew she couldn't lose another one. Heartbroken, she went to her mother, Gaia, the ancient earth goddess who had once plotted against her own cruel husband, and begged for help. Gaia, whose sympathies always lay with the oppressed, listened and devised a plan to save the child and finally bring justice to Cronus. Following Gaia's counsel, Rhea traveled in secret to the island of Crete. There, in a deep hidden cave on Mount Ida, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus. She entrusted the infant to the care of nymphs, who would raise him in absolute secrecy, his cries masked by the clashing shields of warrior spirits, called the Curetes. Having hidden her son, Rhea returned to Cronus. But instead of a baby, she presented him with a large stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. Cronus, blinded by his paranoia, suspected nothing. He took the bundle, thrust it into his mouth, and swallowed the heavy rock, believing he had cheated the prophecy once again and secured his throne forever. He was a fool, as Hesiod tells it, for he didn't know that in place of the stone, his son was left behind, unconquered and untroubled. Deep in his gut, 5 living gods now churned alongside a cold, lifeless rock, and far away, in a secret cave, the child of prophecy was growing stronger, destined to one day return and unleash a war that would tear the cosmos apart. Hidden away in the rugged wilderness of Crete, the infant Zeus thrived. He was nursed by the nymph Amalthea and raised by the gentle Malia, the ash tree nymphs born from the blood of Uranus. He grew to manhood in secret, his divine power flourishing far from his father's paranoid gaze. Gaia watched over him, nurturing the instrument of her vengeance against the son who had failed her. When Zeus reached his magnificent maturity, he was ready to fulfill his destiny. Guided by his grandmother Gaia and the Titaness Metis, known for her cunning, he set his plan in motion. He would free his siblings and challenge Cronus for the throne. He returned from his exile, presenting himself to his father not as a son, but as a force of nature demanding justice. There are different accounts of what happened next. In one, Metis prepared a special potion, which Zeus gave to his unsuspecting father. In another, Zeus's own power was enough to force the issue. Regardless, the result was the same. Cronus, seized by violent convulsions, was forced to regurgitate everything he had swallowed. It was a grotesque and triumphant rebirth. First, he vomited up the stone he'd swallowed in Zeus's place, a stone Zeus would later place at the sacred site of Delphi as a monument to his victory. Then, one by one, his other children emerged, not as helpless infants, but as fully grown, powerful gods, alive and unharmed after their long imprisonment. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon stood beside their younger brother, their hearts filled with rage against the father who had consumed them. The 6 children of Cronus, the first Olympians, were finally united. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, Cronus and the elder Titans loyal to him, based on Mount Othrys. On the other, Zeus and his siblings, who made their stand on the towering peak of Mount Olympus. Thus began the Titanomachi, the War of the Titans. It wasn't a single battle, but a decade-long cosmic war that shook the universe to its core. The world trembled as gods clashed, their power leveling mountains and boiling the seas. For 10 brutal years, the conflict raged with no clear winner. Realizing he needed more power, Zeus again followed Gaia's counsel. He descended into the black abyss of Tartarus, slew the monstrous guard dragon Camp, and freed the prisoners his father and grandfather had kept chained in the darkness, the Cyclopes and the 100-handed Hecaton Shires. Grateful for their liberation, they pledged their fearsome power to Zeus's cause. The Cyclopes, masters of the forge, armed the young gods with invincible weapons. For Zeus, they forged his iconic thunderbolts. To Poseidon, they gave a mighty trident, able to shake the earth and command the waves. And for Hades, they crafted the Helm of Darkness, a cap of invisibility that let him move unseen among his enemies. The Hecaton Shires joined the fight with their terrifying strength, unleashing their 100 arms to hurl mountains and boulders at the Titan armies. The tide of the war turned. The combined power of the Olympians and their monstrous allies was simply overwhelming. In a final, cataclysmic battle, Cronus and the Titans were defeated. The prophecy, spoken so long ago by a mutilated sky god, had finally come true. The Olympians' victory was absolute. The reign of the Titans, which began with the violent overthrow of Uranus and ended in a decade of catastrophic war, was over. The age of Cronus had fallen, and a new order was dawning. Zeus, now the undisputed king of the gods, dispensed justice. He didn't kill the defeated Titans. Instead, he gave them the same fate his father and grandfather had used against their own kin. Cronus and the male Titans who fought against him were bound in unbreakable chains and cast down into the deepest pit of the cosmos, Tartarus. There, in the inescapable gloom, they would be imprisoned for eternity, guarded by the very beings they had kept locked away, the mighty and loyal Hecaton Shires. A new, just order was being imposed on the universe, one where tyranny was punished. One Titan, Atlas, who had been a key general in the war, was given a special eternal punishment. He was condemned to stand at the western edge of the world and hold up the heavens on his shoulders, forever separating the sky from the earth. With their enemies vanquished, the victorious siblings Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades met to divide the world. They drew lots to determine their domains. Zeus, as their leader and savior, won the grandest prize. He became the supreme ruler of the heavens and the sky, the king of all gods and mortals. His throne was set on Mount Olympus, the new center of divine power. Poseidon drew the second lot, and was given dominion over the vast and restless seas, his trident giving him command over every ocean and river. Hades drew the shortest straw and became lord of the underworld, the grim, shadowy realm of the dead. Though his kingdom was sunless, his rule was absolute. Together with their sisters, Hera, who would become Zeus's queen, Demeter, the giver of grain, and Hestia, the keeper of the hearth, they formed the new ruling pantheon, the 12 Olympian gods. The age of raw, chaotic power was over. The era of order, justice, and Olympian law had begun. The cosmos, born from a formless void, shaped by the love and violence of primordial parents, and scarred by a war between generations, had finally found its balance. The reign of Zeus had dawned, and the stage was now set for the myths and legends of the heroes, monsters, and mortals who would live and die under the watchful eyes of the gods of Olympus. The age of the Titans was born in blood. Fueled by his mother Gaia's fury over her imprisoned children, the youngest and sharpest of the Titans, Cronus, took a great sickle his mother had made for him. He ambushed his father, Uranus, and in a shocking act of cosmic betrayal, he castrated him and seized his throne. As the blood of Uranus fell to the earth, it created the vengeful Furies and the mighty giants, both bad omens for the future. With that one violent act, Cronus became the undisputed king of the universe. On the surface, Cronus's reign was a golden age. It was a time of seeming peace and prosperity, when the earth gave its gifts freely, and no one had to toil or struggle. But underneath all that peace was a darkness, a rot fueled by fear. The new king was a tyrant, no better than his father. He never freed his monstrous brothers, the Cyclopes and the Hecaton Shires, from Tartarus. Instead, he made their prison even stronger and posted a terrifying dragon-like beast named Camp to guard them. His rule was absolute, built on crushing any and every threat. The real source of his tyranny was pure fear. His father's dying curse had planted a prophecy in his mind, one that his mother Gaia repeated. Just as he had overthrown his father, so would he be overthrown by his own child. That prophecy became his obsession, poisoning every moment of his rule. He saw potential traitors in every shadow. Cronus, the king of the cosmos, was a slave to his own paranoia. His wife, the Titaness Rhea, gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Hestia, the future goddess of the hearth. But Cronus didn't see a daughter. He saw the prophecy. The moment she was born, he snatched the infant and swallowed her whole, trapping her inside his own body. Rhea was horrified, but what could she do against the might of her husband, the king? One by one, her children arrived, and one by one, they met the same fate. Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Hera, future queen of the gods. Hades, lord of the underworld. And Poseidon, master of the seas. All of them were swallowed by their father before they could take a single breath of air. They weren't dead. Gods can't truly die, but they were trapped in a lightless prison, their potential stolen by their father's paranoia. With every child she lost, Rhea's grief hardened into a quiet, simmering rage. She couldn't lose another. As she carried her sixth child, she swore that this one, no matter what, would be saved. She went to her own mother, Gaia, for help, and together they hatched a desperate, deceptive plan. Rhea traveled to the island of Crete to give birth in secret. In a deep cave on Mount Ida, she brought her youngest son into the world. She named him Zeus, but there was no time to be a mother. While Cronus waited for his next victim, Rhea wrapped a huge stone, the Omphalos stone, in blankets and presented it to him. Lost in his paranoia, Cronus never even looked. He just snatched the bundle and swallowed it in one go, thinking he had cheated destiny once again. He was wrong. The cycle of rebellion he started wasn't over. It had just found its champion. So while Cronus sat on his throne on Mount Athos, thinking he was secure, his greatest threat was growing up in a hidden cave, far from the king's paranoid eyes. Zeus was alive, and he was being prepared. Rhea had left her son with nymphs, who fed him honey and milk from a sacred goat named Amalthea. Some stories say Amalthea wasn't a goat but a nymph herself, who came up with a clever way to hide the baby. Knowing Cronus ruled the land, the sky, and the sea, she hung Zeus's cradle from a tree branch, suspended between all three, making him invisible to his father. But what about a baby god's crying? You can't exactly muffle that. To cover the noise, a group of warrior priests called the Caretes was assigned to protect him. Whenever the baby Zeus cried, they would launch into a wild, noisy ritual, banging their spears against their bronze shields and stomping their feet, their war cries echoing through the mountains and drowning out any sound the infant king might make. Surrounded by all this fierce loyalty, Zeus grew incredibly fast, and he wasn't just getting bigger and stronger. He was learning what it would take to topple a tyrant. He learned cunning from the shadows of the cave and a deep sense of justice from the story of his lost siblings and his mother's pain. He learned about his father's crime, the prophecy, and the throne that was his to claim. A fire was lit inside him, not for power, like his father, but for justice. When he reached adulthood, a powerful god radiating command, he knew he couldn't hide any longer. But he also knew he couldn't face Cronus and the other titans by himself. He needed his siblings. But first, he needed a plan, and for that, he sought out the Titaness Metis, the goddess of cunning and wisdom. Metis saw the injustice of Cronus's rule and the potential in this young god. She became his first and most important advisor. Together, they came up with a brilliant plan. Metis mixed a powerful potion with wine, designed to make Cronus vomit up everything he had swallowed. It was incredibly risky. Zeus would have to get close to the Titan king and earn his trust. He posed as a humble cupbearer, and Cronus, blind to the true identity of the charismatic god serving him, accepted him into his court. The savior of the gods was hiding in plain sight, pouring wine for the very tyrant he'd sworn to destroy. The stage was set. The air on Mount Othrys was thick with power. Cronus, king of everything, sat on his throne, completely oblivious to the serpent he'd just welcomed into his court. Zeus, playing his part, waited for the perfect moment. With a steady hand, he offered Cronus the goblet, mixed with Metis's potion. The Titan king, thirsty and unsuspecting, drank it all. The effect was instant, and it was violent. A powerful sickness racked Cronus's body. He let out a roar that shook the mountain, doubled over, and in a grotesque spasm, he began to vomit. The first thing to come out was the stone, the one he'd swallowed years ago. It clattered to the floor, a monument to his own deception. Then, one by one, he disgorged the children he'd consumed. And out they came, not as babies, but as fully grown, powerful gods and goddesses. First Poseidon, his eyes filled with the rage of a storm. Then Hades, with his dark and silent majesty. Then Hera, her gaze already regal. Then Demeter, full of the life-giving power of the earth. And finally Hestia, the eldest, calm as an eternal flame. They were 5 divine beings, free at last. The first thing they saw was their younger brother, the stranger who had just saved them. His cover was blown. This was Zeus. Zeus led his new family away from the chaos of the Titan court. They climbed the highest mountain in Greece, Mount Olympus. This would be their fortress, their home, and the symbol of their new world order. From there, they could look across the plains to the rival peak of Mount Othrys, where Cronus and the Titans were gathering their armies. The lines were drawn. On one side, the old guard, the Titans, raw, ancient forces led by the formidable general Atlas and the still powerful Cronus. On the other, the new generation, the 6 Olympians, united and burning for justice, led by the clever and courageous Zeus. The greatest war in mythology was about to begin, the Titanomachi. This wasn't a quick war. It was a brutal, 10-year slugfest that tore the universe apart. The first few years were a stalemate. The sheer power of the Titans was staggering. When they attacked, mountains were ripped from the ground and thrown like stones. The seas boiled, and the sky screamed. The Olympians fought back with a fierce, coordinated energy, but they were outnumbered. From their mountain strongholds, they waged a war that shook the cosmos, with neither side able to get the upper hand. Years went by, and Zeus realized courage wasn't going to be enough. They needed a game-changer. His grandmother, Gaia, the Earth Mother herself, gave him some crucial advice. She reminded him of his uncles, still locked away in Tartarus, the 3 Cyclopes and the 3 Hecaton Shires. She told him that victory was impossible without their help. So Zeus undertook a dangerous journey down into the underworld. He battled and killed the monster camp, broke the chains, and freed the giants that his father and his grandfather before him had left to rot. Their gratitude changed everything. The Cyclopes were master craftsmen. In the fires of the earth, they forged legendary weapons for the 3 Olympian brothers. For Poseidon, they made the trident, a spear that could command the seas and shake the earth. For Hades, they crafted the helm of darkness, a cap that made its wearer invisible. And for Zeus, their liberator, they forged the ultimate weapon, the thunderbolt. This wasn't just lightning. It was the concentrated fury of the storm. The other giants, the Hecaton Shires, the 100-handers, were a different kind of weapon. With their 50 heads shrieking war cries, they could unleash a terrifying storm of boulders, a relentless avalanche of rock that the Titans couldn't defend against. The Olympians' ranks also grew when some Titans switched sides. Themis, the goddess of divine order, and her son Prometheus, the Titan of forethought, knew Cronus's paranoid rule was doomed. They allied themselves with Zeus, giving his cause valuable legitimacy. Others, like the river Titan Oceanus, just stayed out of it entirely. The final battle was just a terrifying, all-out display of cosmic power. Armed with his new weapons and flanked by his monstrous uncles, Zeus led the final charge. Hades, invisible in his helm, moved like a ghost through the enemy lines, causing chaos and panic. Poseidon slammed his trident into the ground, splitting the earth open and swallowing entire platoons of Titans. But it was Zeus who was the real terror. From the top of Olympus, he unleashed the full power of his thunderbolts. The earth burned, the oceans boiled, and the air cracked with blinding light. The sheer force of his attack, combined with the constant barrage of boulders from the Hecaton Shires, was just too much. The Titans, for all their raw power, were simply overwhelmed. Their lines shattered. They ran. After 10 long years, the war was over. The Olympians had won. Victory was theirs. But now came the hard part. What do you do with the losers? A new order had to be built, and the old one had to be taken apart for good. For Cronus and his loyalists, the punishment was poetic, in a terrible sort of way. They were bound in unbreakable chains and thrown into the deepest pit of the underworld, Tartarus. Their former prisoners, the 100-handers, became their eternal jailers, making sure the old gods would never threaten the world again. But for the Titan general, Atlas, Zeus had something special in mind, something soul-crushing. He wasn't sent to the darkness. He was sent to the far western edge of the world and condemned to stand for all eternity, holding the entire sky on his shoulders. His punishment was to hold up the very heavens he had tried to conquer, a permanent public reminder of who had won the war. With their enemies gone, it was time for the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, to divide their new kingdom. They drew lots. Hades, some say he got the short straw, received the vast, shadowy underworld, becoming king of the dead. Poseidon was given the seas and all the world's waters. And Zeus, the leader of the rebellion, won the greatest prize, the sky, the air, and the throne as king of all gods and mortals. The earth and Mount Olympus itself was declared neutral ground for all the gods to share. On the gleaming peak of Mount Olympus, the new pantheon made their home. It was a world of light and celebration, a sharp contrast to the gloom and fear of Cronus's time. Here, the gods would hold their councils and feast in their halls, ruling over the fates of mortals. Zeus, as king, now used his thunderbolt not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of his authority and justice. But don't mistake this for a peaceful, happily ever after. The Olympians were defined by very human feelings: love, jealousy, ambition, and revenge. Their courts were filled with drama and intrigue. Their reign would set the stage for all the great myths we know, the stories of heroes, the creation of mankind, and the endless family squabbles that would shape the ancient world. The titanomachi was over, but the story of the Greek gods was really just beginning. The story of Perseus doesn't begin with a choice, but with a terrifying prophecy. King Acrisius of Argos was told by an oracle that his own grandson would kill him. Terrified, he did the only thing he could think of. He locked his daughter, Danae, in a bronze chamber, hoping to hide her from the world and from fate. But you can't defy a god. Zeus, king of Olympus, saw Danae in her lonely prison, and came to her as a shower of golden rain, and from that divine union a child was born, Perseus. When Acrisius found the baby, his fear turned into panic. He couldn't bring himself to kill his own grandson, so he locked Danae and the infant Perseus in a wooden chest and cast them out to sea. But the seas calmed at Zeus's command, and the chest washed up on the island of Seriphos. A kind fisherman named Dictys found them and raised Perseus as his own son. Years passed, and Perseus grew into a strong young man. But Dictys' brother, the cruel king Polydex, became obsessed with Danae and saw Perseus as an obstacle. So he devised a wicked plot. He announced a great feast where every guest had to bring a horse. Perseus, a poor fisherman's son, had nothing to give. Humiliated but proud, he rashly promised to bring the king anything else he wanted. Polydex smiled and demanded the one thing he thought was impossible: the head of the Gorgon, Medusa. The Gorgons were 3 monstrous sisters, but only Medusa was mortal. Her hair was a nest of venomous snakes, and her gaze was so awful that anyone who looked into her eyes turned instantly to stone. It was a suicide mission. But Perseus, son of Zeus, had all eyes on Mount Olympus. The gods Hermes and Athena came to his aid. Hermes gave Perseus winged sandals to fly, and a sickle of adamant, a metal strong enough to cut through Medusa's neck. Athena, who had her own grudge against Medusa, gave him the most important tool, a polished bronze shield. She told him to use it as a mirror and only look at Medusa's reflection, never at her face. She also gave him a special bag, the caudis, to safely carry the head, whose power would remain even after death. But first, Perseus had to find the Gorgons. Their location was a secret known only to the Gree, 3 ancient sisters who shared one eye and one tooth between them. Perseus found them, snatched the eye as they were passing it, and refused to give it back until they told him what he needed to know. With that knowledge, he flew to the Gorgons' island. He found them asleep, surrounded by the stone statues of men who had failed before him. Looking only at the reflection in his shield, he identified Medusa. With a single swing of the adamantine sickle, he cut off her head. From her neck sprang the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysor. As the other Gorgons awoke, Perseus put the head in his bag, put on a cap of invisibility the gods had provided, and escaped. His journey home was just as dangerous. Flying over Ethiopia, he saw a beautiful woman chained to a rock by the sea. This was Princess Andromeda, a sacrifice to Cetus, a sea monster sent to punish her mother for boasting she was more beautiful than the sea nymphs. Perseus was immediately captivated. He promised Andromeda's father he would slay the monster in exchange for her hand in marriage. The king agreed, and as the beast rose from the sea, Perseus pulled Medusa's head from his bag, turning the monster to stone. Returning to Seriphos, Perseus found his mother hiding from King Polydex. Furious, he strode into the king's court. When Polydex mocked him, Perseus declared, "I have the gift I promised." He revealed Medusa's head one last time, and the evil king and his court were turned to stone. His quest was over. He returned the divine gifts and set sail for Argos. But what about the prophecy? Hearing that his grandson was returning, King Acrisius fled. Years later, Perseus was competing in some funeral games when he threw a discus. A gust of wind sent it veering into the crowd, where it struck and killed an old man. That man was Acrisius. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not by malice, but by a cruel twist of fate. If Perseus was a hero of cunning, his descendant Heracles was a hero of pure strength and passion. Known as Hercules to the Romans, he was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Alcmene. From birth, he was marked for greatness and suffering. Zeus's wife, Hera, hated Heracles and was determined to destroy him. She sent 2 giant snakes to his cradle, but the infant demigod simply grabbed them and strangled them. Heracles grew into a man of immense power. He married Princess Megara and had several children, and for a while seemed to find peace. But Hera wasn't finished. She sent a fit of madness upon him, and in a blind rage he killed his wife and children. When the madness passed and he saw what he'd done, he was overwhelmed with grief. To atone for his sin, the Oracle of Delphi ordered him to serve his cousin, King Eurystheus, for 12 years and perform any task he demanded. If he succeeded, he would be purified and granted immortality. Eurystheus, influenced by Hera, came up with a series of 12 seemingly impossible labors. First, he had to slay the Nemean lion, a beast whose fur was immune to weapons. Heracles wrestled it with his bare hands and strangled it, then used its own claw to skin it, wearing the hide as impenetrable armor. Second, he fought the Lernaean Hydra, a multi-headed serpent that grew 2 new heads for every one that was cut off. With his nephew Iolaus, Heracles sliced off the heads, while Iolaus burned the stumps with a torch to stop them from regenerating. Because he had help, Eurystheus refused to count this labor. His third and fourth labors were to capture the Cyrenian hind and the Erymanthian boar alive, which he did through persistence and cleverness. The fifth was a humiliation, to clean the massive stables of King Augeas in one day. Heracles used his brain, not just his brawn, diverting 2 rivers to rush through the stables and wash them clean. But because he arranged for payment, Eurystheus disqualified this labor too. He then defeated the monstrous Stymphalian birds, captured the rampaging Cretan bull, and stole the flesh-eating mares of Diomedes. For his 9th labor, he was sent to get the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. She was willing to give it to him, but Hera spread a rumor that he was there to kidnap the queen, and in the battle that followed, Heracles tragically killed Hippolyta. For his 10th labor, he traveled to the edge of the world to steal the cattle of Geryon, a 3-bodied monster. With 2 labors disqualified, he was given 2 more. The 11th was to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides. On his journey, he famously tricked the Titan Atlas into getting them for him, taking the weight of the heavens on his shoulders for a moment, and then tricking Atlas into taking it back. The 12th and final labor was the most terrifying, to capture Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of the underworld. Aided by Hermes and Athena, he descended into the realm of Hades, who agreed to let him take the beast, but only if he could overpower it without weapons. Protected by his lion skin, Heracles wrestled the hellhound into submission and dragged it to Eurystheus, who was so terrified he hid in a jar and begged Heracles to take it back. Heracles was finally free, but his life remained a tragedy. He remarried, but was tricked by a dying centaur named Nessus. The centaur gave his wife, Deianira, a vial of his blood, calling it a love potion. Years later, fearing Heracles was losing interest, she soaked a tunic in the blood. But it was a powerful poison that burned his skin with unbearable agony. Facing a slow, torturous death, he built his own funeral pyre. As the flames consumed his mortal body, his divine part rose to Mount Olympus, where he was finally made a god, a symbol of endurance who overcame impossible odds. While Perseus and Heracles were solo acts, our next story is about teamwork, camaraderie, and high adventure. It's the story of Jason and his legendary crew, the Argonauts, on their quest for the Golden Fleece. The story starts in Iolcus, where Jason's treacherous half-uncle Peleus had stolen the throne. Jason returned as a young man to claim his birthright, arriving with one sandal missing, fulfilling an oracle's prophecy that Peleus should beware a man with one sandal. Terrified, Peleus promised to give up the throne if Jason could bring him the Golden Fleece from the distant, hostile land of Colchis. He was sure it was an impossible quest. Jason accepted. He had a magnificent ship built, the Argo, and assembled the greatest team of heroes ever seen, including Heracles himself and the musician Orpheus. They were the Argonauts. Their voyage was filled with danger. They battled giants and monsters and freed the blind seer Phineus from the Harpies, foul bird creatures that tormented him. In gratitude, Phineus told them how to pass through the Symplegades, the clashing rocks that crushed any ship that tried to sail between them. Following his advice, they sent a dove through first. It made it through, losing only a few tail feathers. The Argonauts rowed with all their might and just barely slipped through as the rocks crashed behind them. When they finally reached Colchis, King Aetes refused to give up the fleece. He challenged Jason to a series of impossible tasks: yoke 2 fire-breathing bulls, plow a field, and sow it with dragon's teeth. But the goddess Hera had a plan. She made the king's daughter, the sorceress Medea, fall madly in love with Jason. Medea gave Jason a magic ointment to protect him from the bull's fire and told him what to do next. After he sowed the dragon's teeth, an army of stone warriors would rise from the ground. She told him to throw a rock into their midst. Jason did exactly that. The warriors, confused, turned on each other until none were left standing. Furious, King Aetes still refused to give up the fleece. That night, Medea led Jason to the sacred grove where the fleece was guarded by a sleepless dragon. She used her magic to lull it to sleep, and Jason snatched the prize. They fled back to the Argo with Medea, but their escape was brutal, with Medea even sacrificing her own brother to slow down her father's pursuit. After a long journey, Jason returned to Iolcus. The end for Peleus was grim. Medea tricked his own daughters into killing him. Despite getting his revenge, Jason and Medea were driven out as murderers and settled in Corinth. It's here the adventure turns to tragedy. Jason betrayed Medea, leaving her to marry the local princess. Medea's love turned to pure rage. She took a terrible revenge, sending a poisoned robe that killed Jason's new bride and her father. Then, in a final, horrifying act, she killed the 2 sons she'd had with Jason and fled. Jason was left a broken, lonely man. He had won the fleece, but lost everything else. Years later, he died sleeping under the rotting stern of his glorious old ship, the Argo, when a beam fell and crushed him. A pathetic end for a hero whose quest was legendary, but whose personal betrayals led to his ruin. While Heracles was a champion for all of Greece, our final hero was the champion of a single city, Athens. This is Theseus, the slayer of the Minotaur. Theseus was said to have 2 fathers, the mortal king Aegeus and the sea god Poseidon. He was raised in secret until he was strong enough to lift a giant boulder, under which his father had left his sword and sandals. Instead of taking the safe sea route to Athens, he chose the dangerous land path, defeating a series of bandits and monsters to prove himself a hero. He arrived in Athens a hero, but the court was under the influence of the sorceress Medea. Yes, the same one who had married King Aegeus. Recognizing Theseus as a threat, she tried to poison him. But just as he was about to drink, Aegeus recognized the sword at his side and knocked the cup away, embracing him as his son. But Athens was living under a dark shadow. Years before, King Minos of Crete had defeated them in a war. As tribute, Athens had to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete every 9 years to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. The Minotaur was a monster, half man and half bull, trapped in the center of the labyrinth, an inescapable maze. Theseus volunteered to go as one of the victims, vowing to kill the monster. He promised his father that if he succeeded, he would change the ship's black sail to a white one for the return journey. In Crete, King Minos' daughter, Ariadne, fell in love with Theseus. She gave him a sword and a ball of thread, telling him to tie one end to the entrance and unwind it as he went so he could find his way out. Theseus entered the twisting maze, found the Minotaur, and after a ferocious battle, killed the beast. He followed the thread back to freedom, leading the other Athenians with him. He escaped Crete with Ariadne, but in a mysterious turn of events, he abandoned her on the island of Naxos. The reasons are lost to time, but it was a cruel act. In his haste or grief, Theseus made a fatal mistake. He forgot to change the sail. His father, King Aegeus, watching from the cliffs, saw the black sail on the horizon, and believing his son was dead, threw himself into the sea. That sea has been called the Aegean ever since. Theseus returned a hero, but became king through his father's tragic death. As king, Theseus was a great unifier of Athens. But like so many Greek heroes, his end wasn't a happy one. He was eventually driven from his own city and died in exile. His story is the story of Athens itself, brave and brilliant, but also full of complexities and tragedy. He saved his people, but his own thoughtlessness cast a shadow over his legacy, proving that even the greatest champions are deeply flawed. Our story starts not on a battlefield, but at a wedding. A huge party for a mortal king, Peleus, and the sea nymph, Thetis. Every god and goddess from Olympus was on the guest list, except for one, Eris, the goddess of discord. Feeling snubbed, Eris decided to live up to her name. She took an apple of pure gold, carved the words "to the fairest" on it, and tossed it right into the middle of the party. Instantly, chaos. 3 of the most powerful goddesses claimed the apple: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Their bickering got so bad it nearly tore Olympus apart. Zeus, king of the gods, wanted no part in judging this, so he passed the decision to a mortal known for his fairness, a shepherd prince from the city of Troy named Paris. Led by the messenger god Hermes, the 3 goddesses appeared before Paris on a mountainside. They didn't just rely on their looks. They each offered him a massive bribe. Hera promised him power. He would rule over all of Asia and Europe. Athena offered him wisdom and unbeatable skill in battle, guaranteeing he'd win every fight. But Aphrodite's offer was something else entirely. She promised him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman in the world. Her name was Helen. Paris, being a young man more interested in love than power, chose Aphrodite. He gave her the golden apple, and with that one decision, sealed the fate of his city. By choosing love, he made enemies of 2 of the most powerful goddesses on Olympus. Hera and Athena would never forgive the insult, and they would turn their anger against Paris's home, the magnificent walled city of Troy. True to her word, Aphrodite got the ball rolling. But she'd left out one tiny detail. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, was already married. She was the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Using a diplomatic mission as his excuse, Paris sailed to Sparta and was welcomed as a guest in Menelaus's court. In ancient Greece, the rules of hospitality, xenia, were sacred. It was a bond of trust between a host and guest. Paris completely shattered that trust. While Menelaus was away, Paris, with a little help from Aphrodite's magic, convinced Helen to leave her husband, her child, and her entire kingdom to run away with him to Troy. Whether she went willingly or was taken by force is a question poets have argued about for centuries. But either way, the damage was done. It was an unforgivable insult. When Menelaus got back and found his wife gone, his grief quickly turned to white-hot rage. He went straight to his brother, Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae and the most dominant ruler in all of Greece. Agamemnon didn't just see a family problem. He saw a political opportunity. This was his chance to unite all the scattered Greek kingdoms against a rich, common enemy and win glory, treasure, and power. But how could they convince all the kings of Greece to sail across the sea for one man's wife? The answer was in a promise made years earlier. Helen had been so beautiful that dozens of kings and princes had wanted to marry her. To keep them from starting a war with each other, her earthly father had made every suitor swear a solemn oath that they would all defend the marriage of whoever was chosen, no matter what. Now that oath was being called in. Agamemnon sent messengers all across Greece. One by one, the Greek kings gathered their armies and ships. Among them were heroes whose names would become legend. There was wise old Nestor, the mighty Ajax, a giant of a man, and the clever king of Ithaca, Odysseus, a man famous for his quick mind. Odysseus was so desperate to stay with his wife, Penelope, and their newborn son that he pretended to be insane by plowing his fields and sowing them with salt. But his trick was uncovered when a diplomat placed his baby son in the plow's path. Odysseus swerved, proving he was sane and locking him into going to war. But there was one hero they couldn't win without: Achilles. He was the son of the goddess Thetis, the one whose wedding started this whole mess. Achilles was the greatest warrior of his time. He was incredibly fast, supernaturally strong, and destined for greatness. His mother knew of a prophecy that he would die if he went to Troy, so she hid him on an island, disguised as a woman. But the cunning Odysseus found him. He showed up with a pile of fine silks and jewelry, but also a beautiful sword and shield. Then he had a war horn blown. While the other women scattered, one of them instinctively grabbed the weapons. Achilles was found out, and his destiny was sealed. He chose a short life of immortal glory over a long, boring one. And so the stage was set. 1,000 ships gathered at the port of Aulis, the combined might of the Greek kingdoms. They sailed east across the Aegean Sea with a single mission: bring back Helen and burn Troy to the ground. When the Greeks landed on the shores of Troy, they found a city even tougher than they'd imagined. Its massive walls, supposedly built by the gods, were impossible to break through. The Trojans, led by their king Priam and his sons, the heroic commander Hector, and the prince who started it all, Paris, were ready to defend their home. What the Greeks thought would be a quick war turned into a 10-year siege. It was brutal and demoralizing. The war became a stalemate, a bloody cycle of raids, skirmishes on the plains outside the city, and miserable camp life. And all the while, the gods watched from Olympus, picking sides and interfering like it was all a game. Hera and Athena, still mad about the golden apple, helped the Greeks. Aphrodite, loyal to Paris, protected him, while the god Apollo favored the Trojans. Homer's epic, the Iliad, doesn't start at the beginning of the war. It opens in the 10th and final year, when the tension inside the Greek camp finally explodes. The poem's very first word is Menon, rage. Specifically, the rage of Achilles. The fight that kicks it off isn't with the Trojans, but between the two top Greek leaders. Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief, had taken a captive woman named Chrysis as his prize. Her father, a priest of Apollo, came to the camp with a huge ransom, begging for her back. Agamemnon arrogantly refused. So the priest prayed to Apollo, who unleashed a deadly plague on the Greek army. For days, funeral pyres burned nonstop. Finally, Achilles called a meeting and demanded that Agamemnon give the girl back to stop the plague. Forced to agree, Agamemnon's pride was shattered. To show he was still in charge, he announced that if he had to give up his prize, he would take someone else's. And he chose Achilles' own prize, a captive woman named Briseis, whom Achilles loved. This was a massive public insult to Achilles. It was an attack on his honor, the very reason he came to Troy. Blazing with rage, he drew his sword and would have killed Agamemnon right there, if the goddess Athena hadn't appeared, invisible to everyone but him. Instead, he made a new choice. He announced he would no longer fight for a king who had disrespected him so badly. He and his elite soldiers, the Myrmidons, would pull out of the war. He would sit by his ships and watch the Greeks get slaughtered, hoping they'd suffer so much they'd come crawling back, begging him for help. With Achilles, their best fighter, out of the picture, the tide of the war shifted. The Trojans, led by the incredible Hector, surged forward. Hector was everything his brother Paris wasn't: a devoted husband and father, a patriot fighting for his people's survival, not for his own glory. One of the most touching scenes in the Iliad isn't a battle, but a quiet goodbye on the walls of Troy between Hector, his wife Andromache, and their baby son, a painful reminder of what was at stake. The fighting grew fiercer. The Greeks were pushed back, their defenses were broken, and the Trojans threatened to burn their ships, which would have meant total destruction. Agamemnon, in despair, sent Odysseus and other heroes to beg Achilles to come back. They offered him piles of treasure, the return of Briseis, and a public apology. But Achilles' rage had soured into a deep bitterness. He refused. He spoke of two possible fates: a long, forgotten life if he went home, or a short, glorious one if he stayed. Now, he said, no amount of glory was worth the price. At this desperate moment, Achilles' best friend, Patroclus, came to him, crying over the slaughter of their friends. He begged Achilles to let him wear his famous armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle, just to give the Greeks a fighting chance. Achilles, moved by his friend's plea, agreed. But he gave Patroclus a strict warning: push the Trojans back from the ships, but do not chase them to the walls of Troy. Dressed in Achilles' divine armor, Patroclus was a terrifying sight. The Trojans, thinking Achilles had returned, panicked and fell back. Patroclus fought like a man possessed. But in the thrill of victory, he forgot Achilles' warning. He chased the Trojans all the way to the city walls. And there his luck ran out. Stunned by the god Apollo, he was wounded by one soldier, and then run through with a spear by Hector. With his last breath, Patroclus predicted that Hector, too, would soon die at the hands of Achilles. The news of Patroclus's death completely broke Achilles. His earlier anger was nothing compared to the storm of grief and fury that took him over. His mother Thetis commissioned the god Hephaestus to forge him a new set of divine armor. His fight with Agamemnon was forgotten, meaningless now. Only one thing mattered: revenge. Achilles returned to the battlefield like a force of nature. He became a killing machine, slaughtering so many Trojans that the river Scamander choked on bodies and rose up in anger to fight him. He swept across the plain, driving the entire Trojan army back inside their city, all except one. Hector, knowing his time had come, stood alone outside the gates. As Achilles approached, Hector was seized by a moment of fear, and he ran. 3 times, the greatest warrior of Greece chased the greatest warrior of Troy around the city walls. Finally, tricked by Athena, Hector stood his ground to fight. The duel was swift. Achilles, knowing the weak points in his own old armor that Hector was wearing, drove his spear through a gap at the neck. As he lay dying, Hector begged Achilles to return his body to his parents for a proper burial. But Achilles' rage was absolute. He refused, tying Hector's body to the back of his chariot and dragging it through the dust, circling the walls of Troy for his grieving family to see. For days, Achilles abused the corpse, but the gods protected it from harm. Finally, they guided King Priam, Hector's elderly father, on a secret mission into the Greek camp. Unarmed and alone, Priam entered Achilles' tent, knelt, and kissed the hands of the man who had killed his son. He begged Achilles to think of his own father and accept a ransom for Hector's body. This incredible act of courage and grief finally broke through Achilles' rage. He looked at the old king and saw his own father. The two men wept together, Priam for his heroic son, and Achilles for Patroclus and for his own tragic fate. In that moment of shared humanity, Achilles' fury was gone. He returned Hector's body and agreed to a truce for the funeral. The Iliad ends not with the fall of a city, but with the solemn funeral of its greatest hero, Hector. But the war wasn't over. Achilles himself would soon be killed, shot by Paris with an arrow guided by Apollo to his one weak spot, his heel. The Greeks were exhausted, their best warrior was dead, and the walls of Troy still stood. It was clear Troy couldn't be taken by force. It had to be taken by trickery. And so the stage was set for the war's most famous plan, dreamed up by the master of strategy himself, Odysseus. He proposed they build a giant hollow wooden horse and hide their best warriors inside. The rest of the Greek army would burn their camps and pretend to sail home, leaving the horse as a fake offering to the gods. One man, Sinon, would stay behind to play the part of a deserter and sell the lie to the Trojans. The plan worked perfectly. The Trojans woke up, saw the Greek fleet gone, and found the giant horse on the plain. They were overjoyed. Despite warnings from a priest named Laocoon and the prophetess Cassandra, they dragged the statue into their city as a trophy. That night, Troy celebrated, feasting and drinking, believing their 10-year nightmare was over. As the city slept, the hidden Greeks crept out of the horse's belly. They killed the guards and threw open the gates for their army, which had sailed back under the cover of darkness. The Greeks poured into the city. What happened next wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. They slaughtered the men, enslaved the women and children, and burned Troy to the ground. The war was finally over. The fall of Troy was the end of one epic story, but for one of its greatest heroes, it was the start of another. Odysseus' 10-year journey home is a legend all on its own, filled with monsters, magic, and temptation. It's a timeless story about the struggle to get home, a theme that still hits close to home for us today. If you're enjoying this journey through ancient myth, think about subscribing and hitting that notification bell. It helps us keep bringing these epic stories to life. Now, let's follow Odysseus as he sails from the smoking ruins of Troy, with no idea what the god of the sea has in store for him. With Troy in ashes, the victorious Greeks sailed for home. But for Odysseus, the trip back to his island of Ithaca would be as long and dangerous as the war itself. His troubles started when his greedy men plundered a city, angering the gods. But his real curse began when they landed on the island of the Cyclopes, a race of one-eyed giants. Trapped in the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus, Odysseus watched in horror as the monster ate several of his men. To escape, Odysseus came up with a plan. He told the giant his name was Nobody. After getting the Cyclops drunk, Odysseus and his men drove a sharpened, heated stake into the creature's single eye, blinding him. The giant roared, and when other Cyclopes ran to help and asked who was hurting him, he could only yell, "Nobody is hurting me." His friends left, confused. Odysseus and his men escaped by clinging to the bellies of the giant's sheep as he let them out of the cave. But as they sailed away, Odysseus, in a moment of pure arrogance, couldn't resist taunting the blinded giant, shouting his real name. This was a huge mistake. Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. The Cyclops prayed to his father for revenge, and Poseidon heard him. From that moment on, the sea god became Odysseus's bitter enemy, determined to make his journey home a living hell. For 10 years, Poseidon's anger tossed Odysseus and his crew across strange seas. Their journey became a nightmare tour of mythological horrors. They visited the island of the Lotus Eaters, whose fruit made sailors forget all about going home. They met the sorceress Circe, who turned half of his men into pigs. Odysseus, with help from the god Hermes, outsmarted her and made her turn his men back. He ended up staying on her island for a year as her lover, only leaving when his crew finally reminded him they were trying to get home. Circe told him that to find his way back, he had to travel to the land of the dead to talk to the ghost of a blind prophet. In the underworld, Odysseus saw the ghosts of his fallen friends, including Achilles, and even the spirit of his own mother, who had died of grief waiting for him. The experience was harrowing. His trials didn't stop. He had to sail past the sirens, creatures whose songs lured sailors to their deaths on the rocks. Odysseus had his men plug their ears with beeswax, while he had himself tied to the ship's mast, so he could hear their deadly song without being able to act on it. He then had to navigate a narrow strait between Scylla, a 6-headed monster that snatched sailors from the deck, and Charybdis, a giant whirlpool that could swallow a whole ship. He chose to sail closer to Scylla, losing 6 men, but saving his ship. Finally, after all these trials, after losing every one of his ships and all of his men, a shipwrecked and alone Odysseus washed up on the island of Ogygia. He was found by the nymph Calypso, who fell in love with him and kept him as her captive lover for 7 years. She offered him immortality, but his heart still ached for his home, his wife Penelope, and the son he barely remembered. At last, the gods on Olympus, pushed by his patron goddess Athena, took pity on him. They ordered Calypso to let him go. He built a small raft and set sail again, only for it to be smashed to pieces by one last, furious storm from Poseidon. He washed up on another shore, and the people there, after hearing his incredible story, finally gave him a safe trip home. 20 years after he first sailed for Troy, Odysseus finally set foot on Ithaca, but his journey still wasn't over. He came back disguised by Athena as a wretched old beggar to see what was going on in his own palace. He found it overrun by 108 arrogant suitors, all trying to marry his wife Penelope and take his throne. They had taken over his house, eating his food and drinking his wine, and pressuring his wife, who they all assumed was a widow. His loyal wife Penelope had held them off for 2 decades. Her most famous trick was to promise she'd pick a husband once she finished weaving a funeral shroud for Odysseus's father. But every night, she would secretly unravel what she had woven that day. His son, Telemachus, now a young man, had tried to stand up to the suitors, but was powerless. In his beggar disguise, Odysseus endured insults in his own home. He met with his son Telemachus, revealed who he was, and together they planned their revenge. The climax came when Penelope announced a final challenge. She would marry any man who could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow clean through 12 axe heads lined in a row, a feat only Odysseus himself had ever done. One by one, the suitors tried and failed. None could even bend the bow. Then the beggar, Odysseus, asked for a turn. The suitors laughed at him, but he effortlessly strung the bow and sent an arrow whistling perfectly through the axes. In that moment, he threw off his disguise. With the doors barred by Telemachus, Odysseus, his son, and a few loyal servants unleashed 20 years of pent-up fury. The great hall became a killing floor as he slaughtered every last suitor, taking back his home with brutal, righteous vengeance. Even then, the cautious Penelope wasn't convinced it was really him. She tested him one last time. She ordered a servant to move their marriage bed. Odysseus, frustrated, shot back that it was impossible. He himself had built that bed, carving one of its posts from a living olive tree that grew through the middle of the room. It couldn't be moved. It was a secret only the two of them knew. At last, Penelope believed. She wept and embraced the husband she had waited 2 decades for. The king was home, and the Odyssey was finally at an end. We have traveled a very long way together tonight, from the silent void of chaos to the final, fading embers of Troy. The gods have found their thrones, the heroes have played their parts, and the great story is settling into a peaceful quiet. As you drift on the edge of sleep, you can let these tales go. If these stories have brought you some calm and helped to quiet your mind, I would be grateful if you would like this video and consider subscribing. It helps make sure these journeys can continue. I often wonder where these stories are being heard, so if feel inclined, you could leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from tonight. It creates a quiet connection, knowing we are all listening together under the same night sky. But for now, let the stories dissolve into dreams. Let the figures of gods and heroes fade into the soft darkness behind your eyes. The rage of Achilles is silent. The cunning of Odysseus is at rest. The great war is over. The heroes have gone home, and the world is settling into a long, quiet peace. There is nothing left to do now but to sleep. Allow the tide of these old myths to carry you out into a deep and restful slumber. Let the ancient echoes of this story be a gentle rhythm that soothes you, a lullaby from a world long past. There are no more quests to undertake, no more monsters to face. There is only the stillness of the night and the promise of rest. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and let the final pages of this epic tale close gently as you drift into the quiet void from which it all began. Good night.